Hello, everyone. Welcome to Shelf Care with Alicia, where I, a licensed therapist and book lover, get to read all the self-help books and then share my thoughts, takeaways, likes, dislikes, all that stuff. And then you can decide if it's a book for you or not. Because there's so many books out there, and I want you to find the best resources, and it's a great excuse for me to get to read a book. So, this month I read Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents: How to Heal from Distant, Rejecting, or Self-Involved Parents by Lindsay Gibson. This is one that I actually read on audiobook, oh gosh, a couple years ago. Must have been right after grad school because I was still burned out from reading, and but I heard so much about this book. So I did the audiobook and I remember being like, meh, I didn't love it. I think it was overhyped. So I recommended it to a handful of clients, but I never really got into it. And looking back, I was like, well, maybe it was an audiobook thing because some books are just easier to digest in reading form versus listening form, or maybe I was just still in my funk from grad school. So I want to try it again because this is a theme that I've been seeing come up a lot with my clients, and I know that they are not the only ones dealing with this stuff. So I gave another shot. So overall, I think it does a good job of explaining what an emotionally immature parent looks like. It is very relatable in the examples it shares. It paints a really clear picture. Like so many things, I think when you're reading this book, if you have an emotionally immature parent, you can be like, oh, they've literally said this before. So it's very easy to see yourself in some of these things. Like there's things that I saw that I've heard different, like of my own family members say, or parents of some of my clients say. So overall, I love like the clarity in that, and that was much easier to get across actually reading it than the audiobook, I think. Overall, the goal of the book was to help folks develop a more realistic expectation when dealing with these types of parents. So the goal isn't necessarily to change your emotionally immature parents or really to help you figure out like how to like just like yeah, really just make any sort of change in those types of things. It's more about things that you have control over, adjusting your expectations, and just like finding these new patterns that work for you. So I did like the kind of healthy gut check of we, as much as like an ideal world, we would love to maybe change some of these things that we're witnessing. We can't control other people's behavior, so this book is not trying to get them to become more emotionally mature. It also helps you identify what type of emotionally immature parent you have, any like specific roles that maybe you've had to take on to survive those family dynamics, and how to identify emotionally mature people in the future or in your current life and creating new patterns. So it actually covers a lot. Like for a self-help book, it's kind of a smallish book, but it does cover a lot, and I was impressed by how much it covered. So I'm going to start with the likes. I normally start with my dislikes, I think, but normally I've got a lot. And this one I actually have like a pretty even amount. So I did pretty good. All right, so like I mentioned, one of the things that I really liked is how relatable the statements are. I'm going to kind of contradict myself here when I get to my dislikes, but when the author is describing the parents and the examples and the stories, it is very relatable. And like I said, I've heard some of these statements from my own clients and other people in my family. So these are actual quotes from the book. It says, people who function so well that people think they have no problems. So they're talking about someone who is a child of an emotionally immature parent that they learn to just kind of mask and minimize and function so well because they can't really, they've never been safe to share their problems. And so painting that picture was a really empowering way to kind of like start the book and get people's attention right away. There's also something that I know I have personally said before, and I've done my own journey on, but I hear it with almost every single one of my clients some sort of statement along the lines of, I have it all, I should be happy. I'm just going to pause there because I think that's an important statement where that just shows how much of our messaging gets taught that we need to, one, be happy all the time. Um, but like, yeah, that other things can exist, right? So it's like, well, I have a good job, I have a partner, I have these things, like I should be happy. Well, it's human nature to have needs, but for a lot of folks, they were never given that space to identify those or really like express those. So I really liked that it had some of this language in there and also just relatable language to hear that human needs are normal. Like for someone like a therapist, I'm like, yes, of course. Like you deserve to feel heard and you deserve to feel loved. Like that's not asking a lot. But if that was your normal growing up, where maybe it was a lot to be asked those things, or you didn't feel loved or mattered, that might not be your normal. So right out the bat, it's coming in strong, very relatable. Some other quotes that I thought were really relatable that I wanted to share, and there's so many of them. So like me sharing just these few, there's a ton more where this comes from. But one of the needs is I want to matter to someone. I want someone to be with me. But then they say, is that too much to ask? So if those types of things are thoughts that you've had or questions you've asked, this could be a really interesting book to kind of explore a little bit further. I also think it does a good job of likely if you're getting this book or watching this review and then being interested in this book, is you're probably at a point where you started to realize that these dynamics in relationships aren't working anymore, but you have no idea why or what to do. But like, you can tell, like, hey, I'm getting really irritable, or I'm feeling really drained, or I'm really sad. Like, you could tell something's missing. This is a great way to explore, well, maybe it's some of these dynamics. So I love all of that. I also like, 'cause again, this is the theme of a lot of my sessions lately, is how people don't always feel comfortable seeking out help when we do have struggles. And it can be for different reasons. And she does a good job of like exploring and kind of dissecting these a little bit throughout the book. But for a lot of folks, it's because we get taught that our needs are a burden or too much. So, oh my gosh, like our family members or our people are like, I need to make it about myself now. You're being ridiculous. Like she can't handle their emotions. Or you get messages about, well, you are so strong and reliable and independent. You're such a good kid. And so any type of expressing something, whether it's stress, inadequacy, not knowing something, well, then we feel weak and we feel bad. And so I like that there's like, she talks about the multiple ways of why we don't always ask for help because the function looks very different, even though the behavior can look very similar. And I think she does a good job of like exploring some of that. And the last thing that really stood out about how validating it was is how it talked about how humans have a natural desire to have social connection and support. But again, if you grew up where this wasn't your normal, we think, well, I'm weak for asking for help, or I should be able to do this by myself, or in order to be a good person, I was taught to neglect myself and be self-sacrificing and always put other people's needs ahead. And so like we get taught to not really ask for things or be authentic with these people. But actually, like, that's literally in our blood. Like, we are made for connection. And so that's why your body's having these responses when maybe we're not in these best situations. Overall, like I said, there's some good examples of what these dynamics look like. And she gives really good examples of like specific behaviors that can happen. I'm gonna talk about some of my like dislikes a little later, but there's very tangible things where, like I said, you could read some of these things and be like, oh, there's my parent, there's my dad, there's my mom, there's my grandparent, there's so and so. Or if you're reading this as a clinician, you can be like, oh, this sounds like client X's parent, or things like that. And so some of the examples that are like very tangible, just to give you a little clue of what you could get out of this book, is it'll say things like parents who don't ask follow-up questions, or those types of things where it's like if you are sharing that you're upset with someone, like, hey, you kind of hurt my feelings with this, they'll say something like, well, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. And so those types of things, again, you can read these and be like, oof, I've heard that before. Oof, that makes me think of this person. Like I mentioned earlier, it does a really good job of explaining kind of like why we're probably at the point where we're at if we're trying to read this book is that we're likely feeling disconnected and drained because these conversations are feeling one-sided or they aren't reciprocal. They're not satisfying. People are only talking about themselves or disengaging when you speak. And like there's this kind of internal battle going on within you of like, I want to be connected to these people, but I also want to be authentic and seen myself. And so when those things are always fighting, of course you're gonna be tired. Um, so just like really good explanations on a lot of these hidden and kind of underlying things that are going on in our body. Another thing she talks about is emotional labor, which if you know me in any of my socials, you know that's something that I'm very passionate about is mental load and emotional labor. A lot of that is like invisible work. And it's the time and energy that goes into that for creating meaningful relationships. And so if you are in these relationships with someone who's emotionally immature, those aren't really reciprocal. And so, of course, like you're doing more of that emotional labor, you're doing more of this stuff. That's why it feels so draining all the time because you're literally pulling the weight for for both people. And so I think she does a great job explaining that. Talked a lot about parents' emotional reactivity and how part of their emotional immaturity is because they can't tolerate emotions. And so it does a good job of explaining like the context of what's going on for them. Like they're not doing it because they're trying to be mean. They're not doing it, honestly, probably intentionally for most of these people, and they even mention that. But it's because they just want things to go back to normal. That is their safe space. Or they immediately get so triggered that they're like, well, I must be the worst parent ever type of thing. And so it's their own insecurities about being bad, unlovable, or inadequate that helped give some context. Because I think if we hear emotionally mature parent, like, and she kind of does this a little bit in the book too. I didn't really get to dissect into this because I do think it's still overall a good book, but like very blamey or like, oh, they're a narcissist. And it's like, well, they might not be a narcissist. They may just not have ever had their own safe environment. So I think if you take the label out of it, like the narcissist or this awful person, and look at the context, it can like depersonalize it a little bit. So I did like that. Part of the book also comes with like different assessments. Again, if you're in my audience, you watch any of the videos, you know I'm a sucker for like a personality assessment. Like I love the Enneagram test. I love anything where you're like, you are this type of person. Um, as a research informed person, I totally get that there's some flaws to that, but as a human, I love them. So there's different quizzes on how to tell if your parents are emotionally immature. There's 4 different types of emotionally immature parents. There's little quizzes to kind of figure out which one it is, if you're an internalizer, an externalizer, things like that. Overall, I really like that because it just helps you kind of get a clearer picture. It can kind of help narrow down some ideas of like what to deal with this person, or this is my kind of common reaction. It could be honed a little bit more. I have like, we can go a little bit more into the dislikes, but overall, I do think that's like a helpful tool and resource for people. Another thing that I really liked about this book, I'm gonna grab some water first because you need to know my play-by-play. Another thing I liked about this book is even though they're talking about emotionally immature parents, I like that they end the book with how to find emotionally mature people. Because it's not always just like the opposite. Also, like, it's really easy for us to be able to read this and be like, oh, like, yes, I see this, I see this. But even just seeing it in writing of like, oh, like, people ask questions. People remember things about you. Like, we think that this is like super wild if you grow up not having these things. And so I like that there's like a little checklist even of like things you can look out for. And it's just like bare minimum things. But if you grow up in these emotionally immature environments, like it feels like you're asking for the world. It's like, what? You reciprocated something? You showed up and were consistent? What? And so, like, this is revolutionary for people who grow up in these emotionally immature households. Um, but I like that it's in right, like, you deserve that. I would have liked a little bit more focus on where to get these, if not in our family, but overall, I think it did the best it could in that without making it like an entire textbook. So there were also some like quotes. I know I've given you a couple quotes so far, but these were just so good. I wanted to like, I don't think I've ever done this before where I've just shared like quotes without like really any context, but I loved these four quotes so much where I just want to share them with you. And if you do end up reading this book and have your own quotes that you like, please drop them because there's so much quotable behavior. Okay, so the first one is being counted on isn't the same as being loved. Oh, that's a gut punch. I'm pretty sure I shared that one to my work's Instagram account today and was like, oofta, we are being spicy. Um, So yeah, that's just a little nugget. Another one that I loved was unconditional love cannot be bought with conditional behavior. Oh, man, that one like sit on a pillow or something like I can think of so many of my clients' parents that I just want to like send this to my client and be like boom boom. This one made me teary-eyed, and then I immediately thought of my best friend. What a gift it is to talk with someone who's interested in your inner experience. I know that's not as punchy, but if you live in a context where there's these emotionally immature things, like, yes, it is a gift to talk with someone who's interested in your inner experience. And I can think of, when they were describing these things that these emotionally mature people do, and I was envisioning my best friend doing these things, like, I was getting teary-eyed and I was gonna send her like a really sappy voice note, but then I have a bunch of work stuff to do, so I might send her a sappy voice note after this because she's incredible. This next one, I literally gave an audible like, oh, and I'm gonna share this with everyone. This is gonna be like one of my new slogans. I did paraphrase, I did take out like some of the extra fluff in there, but I promise it's still just as good. Humor with an edge is best served as a spice, not the main course. Oh, oh, the thoughts I had with that. Because they're talking about like sarcasm or, kind of being just like sassy or belittling. Like it can be a nice comical way. I mean, me and my husband, we're sarcastic with each other all the time, but there's a time and place for that, right? Like if you're trying to have a serious conversation, if you're trying to have this emotionally connecting conversation and someone's just being sarcastic or not taking you seriously or just, making jokes all the time, that's not helpful for these emotionally meaningful conversations. So it's a spice. It can be helpful. It can add things. Like we're not here to shame it, but it doesn't need to be the main course. Oh, 10 out of 10 writing there. Okay. So those are the main things that I liked. So I hope you got the sense that overall I really did enjoy the wordings of things, very relatable, just like very clear, and like they really do cover a lot. So it was really good. However, I like to be critical, and sometimes I'm a little too critical, if that's a thing. So here's some things that I think could be a little different. Overall, even though it was super relatable, I didn't love all these broad statements like everyone who experienced this was neglected, or every parent who did this was this, or this all came from this. Like, it felt like it was making these really big, conclusive statements or like jumping to conclusions, which to me feels kind of more like pop psychology or pop punchy type stuff, where versus like understanding there's a little bit more nuance in a lot of these things. So just taking those with a grain of salt, like it's like those things. If you see something on TikTok, like it doesn't mean it's like your boyfriend, your ex-boyfriend's not always a narcissist type thing. So just being aware that it's hard to get that nuance in a book. I fully acknowledge that. Um, but yeah, I personally like a little bit more statements of like, sometimes it's this, or they may have done things like this. Like it just adds a little bit more gray versus like, they are always awful. It is always this. This is a guarantee. This is automatically from childhood. And it's like, slow down. If you've watched any of my stuff before or know me at all, you know I am what's called a systemic thinker. If you don't know what that is, I'm not going to bore you with that right now. You'll probably get it as I explain that this book wasn't super systemic, which most books aren't. Like, and this isn't even like to blame this person. Systemic thinking is very much like an LMFT type thing. Most psychologists, LPCs, other folks don't always get taught systems theory, so they're not going to like it's not a bad thing. It's just how my brain works. So they were talking about these behaviors of these emotionally immature parents, right? And I wish it explored more about the systems that they grew up in and like the context they were in. They kind of did this a little bit with talking about like old school parenting techniques about how it's much more about obedience. Kids should be seen, not heard, more physical and corporal punishment, things like that. But I wish there was kind of more of a way to distinguish this was the context of parenting messages they got at the time, and that doesn't mean that they are emotionally immature. Like this is the context that they grew up in, but they can change, and as time goes on, like they can be receptive to learning new things, especially if you get older, versus they're still stuck in those messages and they're not willing or able to change. Like they still expect the obedience. They still have maybe more of these rigid views. So systemic would have been a little bit more like, let's look at some more of the context because it felt like we were being really mean and blamey of a lot of these parents. And when I think about my own family or the families of my clients, like I don't think of anyone that I know and in my clients' world that are inherently bad or like doing these things intentionally. Now, of course, there's going to be some mean people. There's going to be some people who are doing this intentionally. Like, again, I'm not going to say all these people, but I would have liked a little bit more understanding and not to necessarily like excuse their behavior because like, and I guess maybe that's not the point of this book, but I don't know, maybe that's just a systemic thinker in me of like, what is the implication of having these parents growing up with these messages or their own parent style? Does that mean that they can't change? Like, how do we know? I would like to know, like, how do we know if they're emotionally immature or if that's just what they grew up with and they don't know a different way type thing. Also, another little systemic thing, maybe a feminist thing on my part, that I would have liked that maybe it wasn't the point of this book, or again, it's a relatively smallish book, so without going into like an entire thesis of it, it talked a lot about attachment, it talked a lot about emotional labor and parenting and a lot of this stuff, which I loved, but it did ignore how much of that gets put on women and the mothers. So, like when we're thinking about emotionally immature parents, if you think about the traditional parenting roles, it's often the mother. A lot of the original attachment research was about how attuned the mother was, which blames moms for everything, and I think that's really unfair. So again, like if we think systemically, like yes, that is the society messages. There's certain, parenting norms, and that's changed over the years. And um, but yeah, I just didn't love where it's like, are we blaming the mom? Like, are we just why do we always have to blame women? Like, we're doing our best. Okay. There's my TED Talk. Most plays. You can take it or leave it. Going back to those quizzes, I did like the quiz. However, they weren't like normally if you're taking an assessment or something, it's like, okay, there's, low level here, medium level here, high level here, or you need to meet this many to qualify for this. But these, they don't really have any set scores. They're basically like, oh, if you checked off any, your parents are emotionally immature. If you checked off any of these, you had an emotionally tumultuous childhood. It's like, maybe, but like, I think I disagree because the list were pretty like, there's some that were very clear. I was like, okay, yes, this is very emotionally immature behavior. And then there were others where I was like, is this just me normalizing this that maybe I need to talk to my own therapist on? Or is it like being like a human and imperfect and not knowing any better if you check off one or two? Like, if you really only check off one, does that mean that you have emotionally immature parents? I don't know. Like, I don't have the answer for you, but I would have liked a little bit more, again, nuance there where, like, not saying that if you check off one or two things, like, those things are still not okay. It's okay to set boundaries on. Hopefully, you can express yourself for those things. Like, you're allowed to have feelings about those things. But like the label emotionally immature parent, I'm like, that seems really big and important. And if they like it seems all or nothing. Like you did some things you're emotionally immature, and so I don't know. Similar with that, even though I love like a personality grouping when talking about those four different parenting types, there was a lot of like overlap with them. I was like, well, these 3 out of 4 are self-centered, and the 4 out of 4 are this. And so I'm like, can we kind of, I would like a little bit more clarity on them, kind of tease them apart a little bit more. Because I, like, in my mind, I really want to have like a clear picture of like, this is parent A, this is parent B, this is parent C. And maybe that's just a me thing. So take that or leave it. Even though most of the book was super relatable, it had all those like lines that were super relatable and validating, and I loved all that, not minimizing that. There were parts that still felt very like clinical. Like at times it felt like I was reading like a research paper, because it'd be like, oh, here's this attachment term. And then, we're talking about all these attachment researchers. And then here's this other fancy psychology term. And then all these other past researchers. And so I get that they're like, it's hard to find that balance when they're like, this person obviously knows so much about attachment and emotions, where it's like, where's the line? But it can be really easy to be like, kind of cognitive overload with some of these terms and like felt like I was back in like an intro to psych class. So then let's see, another area that I don't know if I mentioned if I liked this stuff or not. But they were talking about more about your own response and how you can be an internalizer or an externalizer. And so I liked that they're very clear and relatable in their language and stuff like that. But it definitely shit on externalizers. Like, and like they kind of even call themselves out where they were like, yeah, this book is gonna probably like resonate with you more if you're an internalizer. And if I was a betting person, I would bet this person was an internalizer. But she basically is just like being so mean to these externalizers, painting them out as like these bad people, that they are the worst, that they are like selfish and acting out and it's gonna turn to alcoholism and just like all this awful stuff. And it's like, it even says like well-behaved internalizers and externalizers act out. And I'm like, that's so rude. That's also so stereotyped. And then besides just like shitting on the externalizers, I'm an internalizer. And so it also minimizes the experience that internalizers face because they're basically like, yeah, well, they're so well adjusted. They are just so good at handling things on their own. They're so this, they're so well behaved. And like, it minimizes the struggles that internalizers have. Like, we feel like we can't go ask for help. Kind of going back to up there earlier when it was like, well, I feel weak if I do this. I feel like a burden if I do this. So we get taught that the only person that you can rely on or the only person that's going to be there or the only person who should kind of figure it out is yourself. And so it's very minimizing for like even though you can be put together and all this stuff, like it leads to she even mentioned this. She's like, yeah, it can lead to like anxiety and depression. Like is that's not fun. Those are not fun things to feel guilty if you say no to something, to have so much anxiety when you're around certain people, to literally get depressed and like not want to go. Like, how is that like a, well, you're just really well behaved. Thanks. I'm taking a lot of medication to manage this. So, anyway. And then, okay, one more thing and then I'll wrap up. But there again, I'm going on like my little soapboxes. At the end, so how am I trying to word this? When I read a how-to, the literal words, how to, my brain thinks I'm gonna learn a lot of tools or ways to deal with this, right? Like, and it's really not, which is fine because I do think you get a lot of like understanding and just like wake up calls for yourself. But the actual like tangible solutions, I just realized I got this from a thrift store. Someone filled it out in a way. That's funny. Um, I read this on my Kindle, so I didn't read this actual physical book, and I just realized, sorry, squirrel brain. Um, so anyway, back to like the tangible things. You don't really get any strategies or solutions until chapter 8, which is like this much of the book. So, like, you're reading all about emotionally immature parents, roles you've played, the different types, kind of how to spot them, and then you finally get some tangible things. So, it's really not that much. So, if you're hoping for a ton of solutions, this might not be it. Also, I didn't love the solutions. Um, it was basically like summarizing it up. It was, we'll just treat your family as if you were like watching like a bird or like you're like an archaeologist like examining something. You're just observing behaviors. Like you're not getting involved, you're not being reactive, you're just observing. And then when you feel yourself reacting, just distance yourself. Create more distance. And I was like, I get that like we're not trying to like change, force these people to change, right? But also sounds like a disservice to ourselves. Like, am I minimizing my needs more by just like observing and not doing anything? Also, like, am I still going to be drained because I'm still around the chaos? So, I don't know. It basically just said detach yourself from these things, focus on different outcomes, and don't expect much. So, do with that what you will. Um, I, being a therapist, think change is really hard, even good change. So I wish if you're giving solutions, I wish you really gave, like, I wish any book, and this is probably like a common critique of mine, is I wish there was more space because it's really hard. Like, if you grow up 30, 40 years in these patterns, And then you suddenly like look at this checklist and you're like, oh, I'm gonna go do this differently. Like that's really hard. It's so much easier said than done. I also wish there was any discussion, because I didn't see any, maybe I missed it, of like the possible negative consequences of these changes that I think like there just needs to be space for. So I get in an ideal world, I would love everyone to be able to express themselves, set boundaries. I think everyone has the right to do those things. I'm also not naive. And I know in some families there's abuse or control that need to be safely considered. So if I'm working with a young adult who's still financially dependent on their parents, as much as I would love to say, yeah, say no to them. Set this boundary with them. Tell them how you really feel. I have to, or I guess I shouldn't say have to, I want to um, help them be fully informed on that might upset them. And they might set their own kind of things to try to get that control back. And I can't make that decision for people. I can't say, well, you should do this or you should do that. So I wish there was some more exploration of like what would happen if there is these negative consequences. Because again, change is really hard, right? So even if we're trying to do good change, and even if they're not abusive or controlling, like they might not still respond well. And if like we're gonna go back to our internalizing or externalizing then. And so it's like, nope, this is normal. Like here's what you can do. Um, I feel like it was just like jump into the deep end, you're on your own, bye. And that's not always great. So I did like this. Like I said, this wasn't even on here. I'm going out of order now. But speaking of the solutions, there's like a really nice little checklist at the back of like small tangible things that you can do. And it just goes like it encourages you to go really like slow or starting with one or two at a time. But again, I just want you to like, you know your situation the most. You know what is, if one doesn't sound right for you, if one doesn't fit, if there's safety concerns to be considered, like do what you have to do. And I hope you have safe places you can get those needs met other places because you do deserve to be able to express yourself and to set boundaries and feel worthy and to feel seen and all those things. But anyway, here's my TED Talk. Okay, so overall, let's wrap this up. If you've been listening this long, you are a saint. I know I can ramble. I just love reading and I have so much to say. So overall, I do think that this is a good book. I can see how this book resonates with people. It's a really common one I see in a lot of my therapists groups. It gives languages to a lot of experience that I think like my clients can really like grasp and they would be able to see themselves in. Maybe they don't have the words or language themselves. So I do appreciate that. I appreciate how validating it is, the examples, anything that's going to talk about like self-compassion, emotional labor, things like that. Love all that. However, I do think it could be a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more systemic, and just more in depth around some of the healing and change and safety processes. But overall, I think if you want to like just be seen and recognize some patterns, then this is going to be a great book for you. And I would give it a 4 out of 5 if that's your goal going into this book. If you're like, I just want to know like what the hell is going on. I want to not feel like I am this rude, awful person, then this is a 4 out of 5. You're going to feel so seen. It's going to give you so much language. It's gonna like, yeah, there's gonna be like, I had those little like, oof moments. You're gonna have so many of those. It's less strong if you want some really tangible solutions for what to do. If you're wanting more solutions and you're more of like an intellectualizer, I would give this one like a 3 out of 5. Just because that's really only like this little chunk of the book. I mean, you can still get the book and then skip to the solution parts. That could be maybe make that a 4 out of 5 for you. But yeah, I would recommend this to, oh, I don't know if you heard that. My cat's food just went off. I would recommend this to internalizers. not externalizers because they just shit on you. But yeah, if you're just like wanting to help understand your context a little better, help figure out maybe like why you're having some of these reactions to your family, I think this would be a really good starting spot for you. I would strongly recommend reading this and like in addition to going to therapy, because be able to like maybe dissect some of the nuance there. Because again, it's hard for a book to be able to do that. But if you take some of these terms with your own therapist, then you could really help figure out like what makes sense, what fits, finding all that stuff. So overall, I think it's a great read. I would recommend it for a lot of folks, and I'm intrigued to hear what your thoughts are if you end up reading it. If you have other book suggestions, I would love to hear them. I've got an ever-growing to-read list, but I'm always looking to buy more books. So if you've got ones you'd like me to read to help figure out if you should spend your money on it, let me know. Otherwise, keep reading, taking care of yourself, and I will see you next time.